Analog horror is not scary. That just pissed everyone off, so before you jump up my anus with your pitchforks about this, let me explain. First and foremost, I love analog horror. I always have, and I always will, for reasons I'll get into later. But most of it isn't all that scary. I've seen a lot of analog horror, and many of the projects generated recently have little fear factor to speak of. Many of these projects rely on the aesthetics the majority of the time for the scare, and this can make the project fall flat on its face. Sure, you have some standouts in the genre that freak me out. Urban Spooks the Painter actually made it hard for me to sleep, and the Tangivirus would make me think twice before taking a sip of water. And I thought the fear center of my brain was dead. That being the case, I'd say the average analog horror is more spooky than scary. And that's okay. Analog horror is for the unnerving vibes. That feeling when you slowly discover something horrible as it gets worse and worse, slowly devolving into a nightmare you were never a part of, but it's still shocking to see. Like a car crash. Are you afraid of a car crash on the side of the road? No. Is it unsettling? Yeah. Just because something is called horror doesn't mean it's going for the on the edge of your seat type of deal. Let's start with one of my biggest things about analog horror, the suspension of disbelief. Analog horror can make it very difficult to suspend disbelief while watching. Case in point, a lot of them slap an analog horror label on the front of their works, which is fine, but it takes the found media element away from its discovery. Of course, for the sake of the algorithm, it has become media convention standard, and as an algorithm dick rider myself, I have to look past this. But it isn't the only reason it's hard to suspend disbelief in the current state of the medium. Many analog horrors will throw an analog filter over regular horror in order to latch onto the search category. While this might work, when there isn't a reason for it, it looks out of place, and can take me out of the horror in question. Making something low resolution and grainy is a tool in analog horror. You use your tools when you need them, not all the time. Let me go with a real-life example of this. A hammer is very good for fixing a loose 2x4, but not your relationship with your child. Making everything hard to see doesn't always help your spooks. The reason it's a useful tool is for when people want to leave things to the imagination and inspire a bit of fear of the unknown. Low resolution and grainy should be used like a paintbrush, not a paint bucket. Even when the analog aesthetic is intended and completely integral to the story, a lot of analog horrors use it in a way that's to the piece's detriment, not its benefit. This is because the genre has come to over-rely on the aesthetics rather than using the aesthetics as a foil to more effectively tell a story. This is far from being a universal case, as many analog horrors have this aesthetic in their piece without it being drowned in it, and they have great stories. I will say, however, that someone slapping a VHS overlay onto a spooky skeleton face has become all too common, even to the point that the genre is becoming hypersaturated with them. That brings me to another issue with the genre. A similar issue I had with the Backrooms, and it's actually the reason I stopped covering it, and the reason I reduced the frequency of the Media Smasher Pass videos. The genre has become incredibly oversaturated. People are coming in and making this content because they want to be popular, and they think it'll spread their concept further, but some of them didn't even know what the appeal was in the first place. This will lead to people slapping a VHS filter over their video, distorting the sound until it's earbleed inducing, and calling it analog horror, and putting another drop in the bucket of the sea of what was once a few hidden gems of media. This isn't to discourage new creators. I want to see much more of this amazing genre. This is to say, if you're gonna make analog horror, make it for the love of it, and create within the context of what analog horror has become today. Know that you're going up against an ocean, so you might need something unique to make you stand out. By the way, if I've covered your analog horror, I like it, okay? I like it. I'm not dissing people who I've talked to in the past. Now, this all might sound weird coming from someone who consistently commentates on the genre and who has made analog horror in the past, but don't get me wrong. I love analog horror, even though it doesn't scare me. It's more for the spooky, ominous vibes, the raging thunderstorm on a summer night vibes, the I'm pretending to be a detective solving this creature murder case even though in reality I'm naked with a fan pointed directly at my sweaty Cheeto dust-stained balls and I would never be picked to be part of a dodgeball team, much less a police station kind of vibes. So, despite it not being so scary all the time, let's get into why I, and many others, love this genre. First off, the feeling of nostalgia. The use of older tech can remind viewers of a simpler time, like childhood. For me, I grew up in the era of TV and DVDs. I was a toddler when VHS was a thing. I had Shrek on VHS as a kid, aight? Hey, one at a time, ladies. This analog presentation hit some primal nostalgic nerve for me, a time when I was seeing media for the first time, when I learned its joys and its fears. Being afraid of a monster can bring a sense of comfort and familiarity. That might sound counterintuitive, but roll with me for a sec. Now that I'm older, I have to fear real things, like death and eternal loneliness, and getting caught for tax evasion. Sometimes, I just want to go back to being afraid of the monster. At least back then, the fear was concrete, and it was only at night. The nostalgia can also make fun of the tropes of the time it was based on. Like, dude, I am waiting for an analog horror to incorporate.
If you or a loved one was diagnosed with mesothelioma, you may be entitled to financial compensation.
The whole genre is primed for meta jokes making fun of boomer cable, and I love it. The feeling of nostalgia can also fix the inability to suspend disbelief, as we talked about earlier. People are more likely to trust the familiar, which makes them more likely to suspend disbelief and get into it. If something feels nostalgic, combine that with the fact that when something familiar is corrupted, it instantly branches into the uncanny valley area of psychology. And you can see why, while not traditionally terrifying, analog horror is effective at being unnerving and entertaining all at the same time. Not only this, but analog horror is a truly special type of art. It can be well made, but often is made of bits and pieces of other media. It can be made both by that attention to detail of a crazed artist making sure that frame by frame it has everything they want, but it's also often made by a kid that only has access to iMovie and the endless found footage archive that is YouTube's video library. This makes for a combination of high-effort construction of low-end media, which not only comes off as charming, but creates a very entertaining juxtaposition. The media also often takes the form of a mystery or a puzzle. Analog horror and ARGs go hand in hand. Their stories are often harder to understand than regular horror, and it is through the piecing together of this media that the true horror is revealed. It gives a sense of tension and nostalgia unlike typical horror. This detective work often happens collaboratively, with multiple creators reacting to and theorizing about the analog horrors, and their audiences doing the same in the comment section. Sometimes, the creator of the analog horrors even incorporates the audience's ideas. I'm the proof! I steal jokes from the comment section all the time! No, I don't! I love analog horror, because it not only creates a community, its community is actively a part of the media itself while it gets created. You can't say that about horror movies, video games, or series. Whenever I'm impressed with a creator's work, I like to introduce myself if they have easily contactable socials. It's so much of a community that I've kinda made friends just working in it. Finally, the real reason that analog horror is so great, despite not being so scary all the time, is the storytelling. Analog horror is often just text and images on a screen and sound design. It leaves everything up to the imagination, and that means that the story is what takes centerfold. It doesn't need VFX or a multi-million-dollar constructed monster suit. The ones that do well just need good concepts and a solid foundation. Sometimes a concept about fear, loss, the unknown. The true human fears that have been with us ever since we fell asleep outside staring into a fire pit. Regardless of the media, be it analog horror, movies, literature, midget porn, anything, it is in the perfect execution of storytelling that is the only time I find myself truly scared with what any media has to offer. What really makes it great is what makes any medium great: the story it tries to tell. As far as I'm concerned, every genre has tropes, and every medium has growing pains. What I've outlined are just the growing pains of analog horror, and I believe they will lead to the genre becoming well-developed and mature. So, is analog horror all that scary? Sometimes, but mostly not. Just like normal horror, not really. Does that matter? Like, at all? 'Cause for me, that wasn't really the fucking point. Analog horror is not supposed to be scary on its own. It's a medium, just like any other. It's scary when there's a true horror story behind it. The best analog horrors don't fixate on what the genre is. They use it to best tell the story behind it. TLDR, analog horror isn't scary, it's the environment you can create and the stories you can tell through it that gives the medium its power. Okay, rant over. Good luck with your fucking lives then. By the way, this was just a rant. I'm a commentator and I make jokes. My opinions do not matter at all, but if you want to, feel free to leave your death threats for me in the comments. If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with all notifications enabled, or I'll just hit you with a rock. Shout out the inner circle. Love y'all.